Commander Alicia Maverick Donovan wiped the sweat from her brow as she crawled through the cramped maintenance shaft of the USS Scrapper. Her knuckles were bloody from where she'd scraped them against an exposed coolant line, but she kept working, tightening the manifold coupling that had been leaking plasma for the past 3 days.
Commander, you shouldn't be doing this yourself,
Came the voice of her XO, Lieutenant Garcia, from the entrance to the shaft.
We have maintenance crews for a reason.
Alicia snorted.
Those maintenance crews are busy keeping the life support systems from failing. Again.
She gave the coupling one final twist and felt it lock into place.
Besides, I like to know my ship inside and out.
Your ship.
Garcia repeated, shaking his head.
You're the only commander in the Coalition who refers to these junkers as your ship with pride.
Alicia shimmied backward out of the shaft, her standard-issue jumpsuit now stained with various fluids that she'd rather not identify.
The scrapper might be held together with duct tape and prayers, but she's got character.
Garcia offered her a hand up, which she took gratefully.
Character, right. Is that what we're calling potentially fatal design flaws now?
Hey, she hasn't killed us yet.
Yet being the operative word.
Alicia couldn't entirely blame him for his attitude. The Raxian-built Z-class corvettes that made up the human contingent of the Coalition fleet were over 30 years old and had been decommissioned by the Raxian Defense Force a decade ago. When humanity had joined the Galactic Coalition 3 years back, they'd been offered these cast-offs as a generous contribution to Earth's defensive capabilities. What the Coalition didn't anticipate was how humans would respond to being handed everyone else's trash. Admiral Therozan's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he reviewed the latest fleet reports. The Raxian commander of the Coalition's 7th Fleet had been dealing with human integration for almost 3 years now, and they still managed to surprise him.
They've done what to the Z-class power cores?
He asked, mandibles clicking in disbelief. Fleet engineer Kiva, a tall, willowy Alestrian with metallic skin, highlighted a section of the report.
They've modified the containment fields to allow for a 37% increase in power output.
But that's
Therozan searched for the right word.
suicidal. Those containment fields were designed with triple redundancies for a reason. The Z-class had stability issues even at standard output levels.
I know, Admiral.
Kiva said, her faceted eyes gleaming with what might have been admiration.
I asked their chief engineer about it. Commander Chen said they've compensated by installing manual bypass systems and additional heat sinks.
Manual bypass? You mean they've added points of failure that rely on human reaction time?
Therozan's scales flushed a deep purple with alarm.
Yes, sir. And they've removed the automated safety protocols that would shut down the engines during power spikes.
Therozan stared at her in horror.
Those protocols were there to prevent catastrophic core breaches.
The humans claimed the protocols were too conservative and engaged unnecessarily, limiting their combat maneuverability.
Of course they engaged. They were preventing the ships from exploding.
Therozan's tendrils writhed in agitation.
Send a fleet-wide order. All human vessels are to report to Coalition Station 7 for immediate inspection and restoration of safety systems.
Kiva hesitated.
Sir, with respect, there's more. They've also modified the inertial dampeners.
Therozan sank back in his chair.
Do I want to know?
They've reduced coverage to prioritize critical areas only. This allows for higher G maneuvers without exceeding power constraints.
Higher G maneuvers.
Therozan repeated dully.
In 30-year-old corvettes with compromised containment fields and partial inertial dampening.
Yes, sir. Captain Wells referred to it as feeling the ship. He seemed quite enthusiastic about it.
Therozan made a noise that translated across species as profound resignation.
Humans.
The alert klaxon jolted Alicia from a fitful sleep. She was moving before her eyes were fully open, muscle memory guiding her into her flight suit as the ship's AI announced.
All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, all hands to battle stations.
She burst onto the bridge 90 seconds later, fully suited up.
Status report.
Krell attack force incoming.
Lieutenant Garcia reported, his voice steady despite the circumstances.
3 heavy cruisers and a dozen fighters dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They're on an intercept course with Coalition Station 7.
Alicia swore under her breath. Coalition Station 7 was currently operating at reduced capacity while undergoing upgrades. It housed over 15,000 civilian personnel and was defended by only a skeleton military presence. The rest of the 7th Fleet was 2 systems away on training exercises.
Where's the nearest coalition response force?
Nearest QRF is at least 3 hours out.
Communications Officer Park replied.
Station 7 has sent out a distress call, but
by then, there'll be nothing left to save.
Alicia finished grimly. The Krell weren't known for taking prisoners.
What coalition forces are in system?
Just us, ma'am.
Garcia said.
The 5-finger discount, the patchwork, the duct tape special, and the suicide run.
Alicia couldn't help but smile at the unofficial names of the human Z-class corvettes. Admiral Therozan had been apoplectic when he'd learned what the human crews had painted on their hulls.
So, 5 obsolete corvettes against 3 heavy cruisers and a fighter squadron.
She summarized.
Could be worse odds.
Garcia raised an eyebrow.
Could they?
Sure, could be 6 cruisers.
Alicia settled into the captain's chair and opened a channel to the other human ships.
This is Commander Donovan of the USS Scrapper. You all seeing what I'm seeing?
Loud and clear, Maverick.
Came the drawled response from Captain Wells of the 5-finger discount.
Looks like someone didn't get the memo about Coalition Station 7 being under our protection.
Station 7 has minimal defenses right now.
Alicia said.
They're sitting ducks.
So what's the play?
Asked Commander Chen from the patchwork.
We can't exactly go toe-to-toe with those cruisers.
Alicia bit her lip, mind racing through possibilities.
No, but we can buy time for the civilians to evacuate. Station 7 needs at least 60 minutes to get their people to the escape shuttles.
1 hour against those odds?
Commander Rodriguez of the duct tape special chuckled darkly.
Well, I always wanted to go out in a blaze of glory.
No one's going out today if I can help it,
Alicia said firmly.
but we're going to have to get creative. I'm sending tactical data now. We're going to execute Maneuver Bravo 6.
There was a moment of silence on the comm.
Bravo 6?
Captain Wells finally said.
That's never been tested outside of simulations.
No time like the present.
Alicia replied.
The Krell won't be expecting it. Hell, no one would expect it because no one else would be crazy enough to try it.
Admiral Therazon is going to have an aneurysm.
Chen noted with what sounded suspiciously like glee.
Only if we survive to get chewed out.
Alicia pointed out.
Form up on my mark. Let's show these Krell what happens when they mess with the ships they call death traps.
Admiral Therozan was halfway through his noon meal when the emergency transmission came through. He answered immediately, food forgotten.
report.
Admiral,
Came the panicked voice of Station 7's commander.
we're under attack by Krell forces. 3 heavy cruisers and fighter support. We've begun evacuation procedures, but we need immediate military assistance.
Therazan's heart sank. The bulk of his fleet was too far away to help in time.
What defensive assets do you have available?
Minimal, sir. Just the station's defense grid and...
The commander paused.
Sir, the human corvette squadron is moving to intercept.
The Z-class corvettes?
Therazan's scales paled.
Against Krell cruisers? Order them to stand down immediately. Their priority should be evacuation assistance only.
I've tried, sir. Commander Donovan acknowledged my order and then...
The station commander seemed at a loss for words.
Then what?
Therazan demanded.
Then she said, and I quote, "With all due respect, sir, get your people to the shuttles. We'll handle the Krell. They've cut communication and are executing some kind of formation I've never seen before."
Therazan closed his eyes briefly. 5 obsolete corvettes against 3 state-of-the-art Krell cruisers. It would be a massacre.
Patch through visual feed.
He ordered. If these humans were going to sacrifice themselves, the least he could do was witness their courage. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the vast emptiness of space punctuated by the looming shadows of the Krell cruisers. The tiny Z-class corvettes looked like gnats by comparison. But instead of forming a defensive screen, as doctrine would dictate, what were they doing? The 5 ships had arranged themselves in a loose pentagon formation and were accelerating directly toward the Krell cruisers at speeds that made Therozen's scales itch with anxiety. As he watched, the corvettes suddenly cut their main engines and fired maneuvering thrusters in a precisely coordinated sequence that sent them spinning along their longitudinal axes while maintaining their forward momentum.
What in the 7 moons are they doing?
He murmured. The spinning corvettes now released what appeared to be debris from their cargo bays. But no, not debris. Mines. Hundreds of improvised space mines, their trajectories affected by the centrifugal force of the spinning ships, creating an expanding spiral pattern that filled the space between them and the Krell cruisers. The Krell, clearly confused by this unorthodox tactic, opened fire. But the spinning corvettes presented constantly changing target profiles, making them nearly impossible to hit with conventional targeting systems. Meanwhile, the minefield continued to expand, forcing the Krell cruisers to alter course.
Ingenious,
Breathed Fleet Engineer Kiva, who had joined Therozan at the display.
They're using the mines to control the battle space, channeling the Krell into a predictable evasion pattern.
As if on cue, the human corvettes suddenly killed their spin and fired their engines at full power, directly toward the Krell cruisers. Therozan watched in disbelief as the tiny ships accelerated to speeds that had to be putting catastrophic stress on their modified engines.
They can't possibly withstand those G-forces.
He protested.
They're partial inertial dampening modifications.
Kiva reminded him.
They've sacrificed comfort for performance.
The corvettes streaked toward the Krell vessels, weaving through their own minefield with a precision that seemed impossible. As they closed with the lead cruiser, they split formation, each ship targeting a different section of the larger vessel.
They're going to ram it.
Therozen realized in horror. But at the last possible moment, each corvette released a cluster of objects and executed a high G turn that would have liquefied any Raxian pilot. The objects, makeshift torpedoes cobbled together from spare parts, Therozen later learned, detonated against the cruiser's hull in a synchronized pattern that overwhelmed its shield generators. The lead Krell cruiser's shields flickered and died.
Now,
Alicia Donovan's voice rang out over the open channel that Station 7 was monitoring.
hit them with everything we've got.
The 5 corvettes swooped around and unleashed a barrage of conventional weapons fire at the now vulnerable cruiser. Individually, their weapons were barely a threat to a capital ship, but concentrated on specific weak points, power conduits, weapon emplacements, engine nacelles. They began to take a toll. The Krell cruiser listed to one side, secondary explosions blossoming along its hull. The other 2 cruisers moved to protect their wounded companion, but found themselves navigating the expanding minefield, which limited their options.
Station 7, this is Commander Donovan.
Came the transmission, punctuated by static from weapons interference.
How's that evacuation coming?
30% complete.
Replied the station commander.
We need at least 40 more minutes.
You'll have it.
Donovan promised.
All right, people, let's go for round 2. Execute Maneuver Charlie 9.
Therozan watched in astonishment as the human ships regrouped and began another seemingly suicidal attack run. But this time they approached from 5 different vectors, forcing the Krell to divide their defensive fire.
Their ships can't take much more of this.
Kiva observed, pointing to the telemetry data.
The stress on those modified engines is approaching critical levels.
As if to prove her point, the USS Duct Tape Special suddenly vented plasma from its starboard engine. The ship went into a spin, careening toward the second Krell cruiser.
Rodriguez, eject.
Alicia's voice commanded over the comm.
Negative, Maverick.
Came the calm reply.
I've still got control. Mostly.
To Therozan's amazement, Commander Rodriguez somehow converted the spin into a controlled tumble that brought his weapons to bear on the Krell cruiser's sensor array. A precisely aimed burst of fire later, and the cruiser's main targeting systems went dark.
I'll be damned.
Therozen whispered. The battle continued for another excruciating 38 minutes. The human corvettes darted and weaved through space like angry insects, never staying still long enough for the Krell to get a solid lock. Their modified engines push far beyond safety limits, their hulls absorbing punishment that should have destroyed them 3 times over. One by one, the corvettes sustained damage. The five-finger discount lost its port weapons array. The Patchwork's life support failed, forcing the crew into emergency suits. The Suicide Run's main computer went offline, leaving the pilot to fly manually. The duct tape special lost engine power completely and had to be towed out of the battle zone by the scrapper. But somehow, impossibly, they held the line. The first Krell cruiser was crippled beyond recovery. The second had lost its main weapons and targeting systems. The third, recognizing the Pyrrhic nature of any potential victory, finally ordered a retreat. As the Krell ships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving their damaged comrade behind, Station 7 reported the evacuation 98% complete.
We did it.
Alicia Donovan's exhausted voice came over the comm.
Station 7, get your remaining people out. We'll cover you until the last shuttle's away.
Admiral Therozan stared at the tactical display in silence for a long moment. Then he opened a channel to the human commander.
Commander Donovan, this is Admiral Therozan.
Admiral,
Came the surprised reply.
didn't expect to hear from you, sir.
I witnessed your defense of Station 7.
Therazin said formally.
I find myself at a loss for words.
Just doing our job, sir.
No, Commander, you did far more than your job. You and your pilots accomplished the impossible today.
There was a pause before Donovan responded.
Not impossible, sir, just improbable. These ships might be old, but they've got heart. Or rather, they've got crews who give them heart.
Therazin's mandibles clicked in what his staff recognized as his version of a smile.
Indeed. When you return to base, Commander, I want full technical documentation on all modifications you've made to those vessels.
Sir?
Donovan sounded wary.
Not for disciplinary purposes, Commander, for implementation across suitable vessels in the fleet.
The silence that followed was profound.
Did I hear that correctly, sir?
Donovan finally asked.
You want our modifications?
I want your innovations, Commander. It seems I've been mistaken about human approach to ship design and combat tactics. Your creativity may well be the edge we need in this conflict.
Well, I'll be damned.
Donovan murmured, clearly not meant for transmission.
Yes, sir. We'll provide complete documentation. Though I should warn you, some of our solutions aren't exactly by the book.
I gathered that.
Therazin replied dryly.
Nevertheless, results speak for themselves. Well done, Commander. Bring your people home.